Welcome back to the channel. As you guys know, Ram is definitely going to be doing some overhauls on their HD trucks. Now, I've done a few videos on what they're going to be doing, but one thing I haven't seen being discussed is, are they going to be doing anything new on the frames? And is Ram potentially going to get away from the 5-link coiled suspension out back? So we're going to discuss that in this video. Now, I saw that TFL truck did show another camouflage truck, so we're going to go over that with you guys in this video as well. But be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Let's go ahead and jump into the video.
TFL truck did release this article on June 15th, and you guys can see this is the truck. Now, I'm not going to read this to you guys, but be sure to pause it if you want to see more here. But this is obviously the refresh to the refresh, because they pretty much refreshed truck in 2019 and they're refreshing the truck for 2025. The good news is you guys can see this is a mega cab, and this is the largest cab since they're carrying this over for 2025 again. And so if you still want a larger cab to compete with the GM and Ford pickups, this is what you have to pick. Unfortunately, the beds are probably going to still stay the same. So in this video, we're going to talk about these frames and this rear suspension on these 3/4 ton. So let's go ahead and jump back into the video.
Sometime during the 2010s, Ram decided to get rid of the leaf pack on the 3/4 ton trucks and go with that coiled suspension out back. Now, during the redesign of Chevy and the refresh of Ford back in 2020, both of those manufacturers decided to go away from that 10,000 pound gross vehicle weight rating. And what that did was it allowed the trucks in the 3/4 ton segment to have realistic payload capacities. So before 2020, Chevy 2500s, higher trims would have around 1,800 to 2,000 pounds payload. Same thing goes for Ford. They would typically be under 2,000 pounds if they were diesel, higher trim. And today, those numbers are typically, I would say, 2,800 pounds plus. Now, because Ram went with that coiled suspension, I have a theory that they may not be able to go higher on the gross vehicle weight rating because this suspension is not capable for more payload. Now, that makes sense, and I understand that. How the truck I'm driving right now is a 2500, so it has that multi-link rear suspension. Now, this one, on the other hand, does have air suspension out back. I'm hoping, this is just my hope for a Ram for 2025. My hope is maybe they just make these trucks have standard air suspension, and they raise that gross vehicle weight rating as an option for people. Like, even if it's just 800 pounds, having at least 2,500 pounds plus of payload is enough for most people. But having less than that is just not enough, right? Now, the other thing I'm trying to figure out is, have they decided to go with a new frame? Because that might be another weak point on the 3/4 tons. If you've never jumped under the 3/4 ton HDs and then jumped under a 3,500 1 ton, the frame is totally different in that rear section, and it's actually a little bit thinner. I've been looking for a 2,500 without the bed on it, like a cabin chassis, to compare up against a 3,500 without the bed on it too, just to show you, because there's a big difference. So here are the negatives with this multi-link coiled suspension, or even with the air suspension. It's not just the gross vehicle weight rating, which obviously affects your payload. The gross axle weight rating on these trucks are really low. I mean, granted, I know Ford is only like maybe 300 pounds more. GM is just class leading by far. They have a 6,600 pound gross axle weight rating out back. That's what I'm talking about with the axle ratings in the rear. 6,090 pounds, I think, is Rams. Ford's is like 6,340 pound axle rating, and then GM has 6,600 pounds, and this is all for 3/4 ton segment. And if you go to a max trailering 3/4 ton GM truck, it goes up to what the 1 tons have, which is 7,000 250 pounds. So again, this is something that Ram really has to consider. I think a lot of people are learning more and more about payload, because I do see more 1-ton trucks across the board at Ram, Ford, and GM dealers. But yeah, what are you guys' thoughts? I do believe that even if they don't raise that gross vehicle weight rating on the 3/4 tons as like standard equipment, it would be nice to at least have the availability. Now, I know some dealers will probably see it and say, screw it, I'm gonna go ahead and get the max. And that's another thing too to discuss is maybe Ram could add a max trailering package or a max tow package that they had on like the 1 tons to the 3/4 ton segment and give it that higher gross vehicle weight rating. That way people who still want that 10,000 pound threshold can still have it. And then people who don't want to go to a 1 ton can just continue to buy these trucks. Because I'm serious when I say this truck rides amazing. When you have air suspension out back, and I do know even like with the Rebels, you can get the Philistine shock absorbers, like the ride just becomes just that much better in terms of how it performs. But yes, I do think that Ram has a lot of work to do on this truck. If they're not going to be redesigning the frames, then I'm hoping, there's my hope here, I'm hoping that they can somehow find a way to raise that number for the axle ratings, and obviously if they have an option for like a max tow package to give you a higher gross vehicle weight rating. But again, if they were to be able to give it stiffer springs or coils out back to offset that extra capacity, because if you're putting another 1,000 pounds in the bed, then that's going to really make the suspension sag if you don't get the air suspension. But at this point, there is no updates on whether or not Ram's going to be adding a higher gross vehicle rating, but everyone else has done that, and it's definitely something that's crucial, because some people don't want a 1-ton truck because they might just have a 10,000 pound dump trailer that they tow, or they might have a travel trailer that's, you know, 12,000 pounds. It's a toy hauler, and they don't need a 1-ton truck for that type of trailer. So there's just a lot of things right now that I'm hoping Ram does. Like, this has been talked about on my channel a lot. Like, I've been really hitting this because, you know, I wouldn't mind considering a Ram in the future if they do raise that gross fuel weight rating, because my GMC AT4X, it's a 3/4 ton. It has almost 3,000 pounds of payload capacity. I think it's like 2,854 rounded off. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's pretty high. And I have an off-road truck with bigger skid plates, you know, 35-inch tires from the factory. So my truck is naturally heavy. I think it has like a curb weight of about 8,400 pounds. So it's not light by any means. So even with a truck like that, if you were to get a bare bones diesel tradesman, it would probably have about 2,200 pounds of payload capacity. And that's just not enough for a truck like this that can tow 15,000 plus pounds behind it. Now you might be wondering, what are the links? So you have one right there, and the second one is right here, and it's going to be the exact same on the passenger side. So, oh, actually these are a little bit easier to see. So one there, one there. So that's 4. The 5th one is going to be right under here in the rear, and it's right here. So that's the 5-link coiled suspension. Now, as I said, this one has the air suspension on it, and I think that's like, what, $1,700. So it's pretty expensive. And where those airbags are, that's where the coils would be at. So when you get the air suspension, it gets rid of those coils. So you should have about the same payload capacity, I would say, with or without that package. And just to make sure I told you correctly on that option, it is $1,705. And I did say 6,090 pounds for that gross axle weight rating in the rear. It's actually 6,040 pounds. You guys can see that 10,000 pound gross fuel weight rating. So with the curb weight minus that, 1,894 pounds of payload. So if they were to add 1,000 pounds, make that gross vehicle weight rating 11,000 pounds, this truck would have 2,894 pounds of payload capacity. And that would be perfect. Even if they did 800 pounds, it would be 2,694 pounds of payload. Now, last thing I'm gonna show you, you guys see this framing here? Just take a really good note of this section here, and then here is the 1 ton. And then here's the other section compared to. So definitely a big difference. But I hope you guys liked the video. This Limited is available for sale. And it's a really nice spec. Has the ram boxes, air suspension. And yeah, the black appearance, or night edition is what they call it for Ram, is menacing for sure. Be sure to check out Larry H. Miller, Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram's inventory here in Sandy, Utah. See you guys soon.